Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're going to put on our detective hats and solve some really common mysteries hiding inside the knee.
All right, let's just dive right in. We're going to focus on one small but super critical bone, the kneecap. You know, its official name is the patella. And it seems pretty straightforward, right? But trust me, it's holding on to some pretty fascinating secrets. And this leads us to, the number one question that pops up when a doctor sees a knee x-ray for the very first time. Are we looking at a fresh injury, or is this just how this person is wired?
So this brings us to our very first clue. It's a classic case of mistaken identity in the anatomy world, and it's called the bipartite patella. Honestly, it's one of the most common things that can totally look like a bad injury, but it's something else entirely.
Okay, so a bipartite patella is just something you're born with. See, when you're developing, all these little pieces of bone are supposed to kind of melt together to form one solid kneecap. But sometimes they just don't. So instead of one bone, you end up with two. It's not broken, it was just built a little differently from the start.
Now this is where it gets really cool, especially if you know what you're looking for. On an x-ray, a real fracture is going to have these sharp, jagged, angry-looking lines. You know, the sign of something breaking violently. But a bipartite patella? The edges where those two bone pieces meet are all smooth and rounded. It's like a friendly separation, not a fight.
Okay, so here's the kicker. Even though it's not a break and it's considered a normal variation, this unique anatomy isn't always totally innocent. You know, that tiny bit of extra movement between the two pieces can sometimes cause irritation and, actual pain right there in the front of your knee.
All right, so now that we've covered what's not a break, let's talk about when things actually do go wrong. We're going to look at why a kneecap might pop out of place and what happens when it really truly fractures.
So, a super common injury is a lateral dislocation. That's when the kneecap just pops right out to the side. And the mechanics behind it are pretty wild. Just picture this. Your leg is a bow, and your big thigh muscle, the quadriceps tendon, is the bowstring. If your knee suddenly bends inward, that tension on the bowstring can just yank the patella sideways, pulling it right out of the little groove it's supposed to glide in. Ouch!
The good news is, our bodies are pretty smart and have some built-in safety features. You've got this muscle on the inside of your thigh, the vastus medialis, that's constantly pulling inward, trying to fight that sideways pull. And on top of that, the outer edge of your thigh bone, the lateral femoral condyle, is shaped like a little bumper rail to help keep that kneecap from flying off the tracks.
But here's a crazy fact. Not all kneecaps are shaped the same. It's true. Way back, a radiologist named Gunnar Weberg actually sorted them into three main types. And it turns out, if you're born with what's called a type 3 patella, which has a really small inner side, you're more likely to have that kneecap slide out of place. Your own anatomy just gives you a little less stability to work with. And when the kneecap does actually break, the way it breaks tells you a whole story. If your quad muscle contracts super hard and suddenly, it can literally rip the patella in two. That's a transverse fracture. And when that happens, there's no way you can straighten your leg. But if you take a direct hit, like falling right onto your knee, it might shatter into a bunch of pieces. That's a comminuted fracture. But the weird thing is, the muscles and tendons around it might be okay, so you might still be able to extend your knee a little bit.
All right, get ready for a really fascinating plot twist in our little detective story. It turns out that what's normal for a bone completely depends on your age. Seriously, an x-ray of an adult's knee and a teenager's knee can look totally different, even if nothing is wrong. And this is the perfect example. You know that bony bump right below your kneecap? That's the tibial tuberosity. In a teenager, an x-ray of that spot can look, kind of a mess. It can look lumpy, fragmented, just all around irregular. Now, in a grown-up, that would set off alarm bells. But in a teenager, a lot of the time, it's just the bone still under construction.
And here's why. Think of your shin bone, the tibia, like a big construction project that takes almost 20 years to finish. The main shaft starts to harden way back when you're in the womb. But the ends of the bone, they don't even start to become solid bone until after you're born, and they won't fully connect to the main shaft until you're somewhere between 18 and 20 years old.
And the fibula, that thinner bone right next to the tibia, it's on a similar timeline, but it has its own schedule. It starts hardening a bit later in the womb and actually finishes up a couple of years earlier. The point is, every single bone has its own unique timetable for growing up.
Okay, so let's wrap this case up. We've looked at all the evidence: bones that are supposed to be in two pieces, kneecaps that come in different shapes, and bones that look kind of messy while they're growing. So what's the big takeaway from our investigation?
It really comes down to this. We have this idea that our bodies are supposed to be these perfect, symmetrical machines. But that's just not how it works. The body's real blueprint has a lot of room for variation. And seeing something that's asymmetrical or irregular isn't always a sign that something's wrong. A lot of the time, it's just a sign that you're, well, you.
And that leaves us with one last thing to think about. This whole deep dive into the knee really shows us that to understand our own health, we have to look past the idea of perfect. We have to appreciate just how complex and different each of our bodies can be. So it makes you wonder, right? If a normal bone can look like that, what other assumptions are we getting totally wrong about our bodies?